Hello, everyone, and welcome in. It is Thursday, and of course, that means best bets with BetSided, and that means Ben Heisler. It means Matt Verderame. We are ready to go. It is Raider Week in Kansas City, Week 5, the NFL season. The Chiefs, of course, 3-1, coming off a very nice win over the Bucs. The Raiders coming off their first win of the year, beating Denver in Vegas. And Heisler, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling about this game?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's always good to be back on Thursdays talking about ways that we're going to attack this game from a betting perspective. I told you beginning of the week, Verderame, watch out for that line because it's going to move after what the Chiefs did to dismantle Tampa Bay. You know, the Chiefs have been one of the most public darlings over the last several years with Mahomes as the quarterback. Sure enough, the line jumped 2.5 points from 50.5 all the way up to 53. Now it has since gone back down anywhere between 51 and 51.5. And that kind of makes sense, right? 51 is one of the most key numbers you can find in a total. But the question becomes whether or not Chiefs fans and Chiefs bettors are going to start bumping it back up again, or because of the rain in the forecast this week, it comes down. There's a lot of different ways to potentially approach this, but we're going to cover all of them today.
I got to tell you, I said last week I was surprised when the Chiefs opened as 2.5-point favorites in Tampa. Now, obviously, the Chiefs could have opened up as 10-point favorites. It would have been just fine. But I was surprised. I thought it would be a pick 'em. And then I was surprised it went all the way to Tampa Bay being favored by like 1.5 by the time the game actually kicked off. I was surprised this line wasn't a little bit higher this week. I know it's a division game. I know the Raiders are, I think, a little better than their record. The Chiefs have pounded them over the years. I mean, just absolutely. In fact, I have a feature coming out tomorrow on this. The Chiefs have pounded the Raiders since Mahomes has been their quarterback. So I actually was a little bit surprised it was a touchdown. Now, I think it could be around that. It's not a crazy line, but I thought it would be closer to like 8.5, something like that.
8.5 would have been a really strong line, I think, for a divisional game, primetime Monday Night Football. And I also think if you're the book, you have to consider, well, okay, at some point, if I hang the line at 8.5, that's almost a guarantee that a lot of the professionals are going to bet this number back down.
Right, because they'll take over the touchdown.
So, like, your analysis of whether or not the Chiefs deserve to be 8.5-point favorites is completely and totally reasonable. I mean, the numbers against the Raiders historically, since Mahomes has been in quarterback, are incredible. We'll get into some of those trends coming up in just a second. But just looking at the last, they pour on points on Las Vegas. Last couple of years, they beat the hell out of them. They weren't close games. It was 48-9 in Kansas City back in December. And then the previous game was 41-14.
Right.
They had 11 touchdowns in those games. Year before, they put up 35 points against Las Vegas and then lost that game back in October, 32-40.
Yep.
Verderame, they've had 5 games. 4 out of their 5 games against Las Vegas, they've put up 40 or more points. That's insane.
So I went back because, like I said, I wrote a feature for tomorrow about this game. And basically wrote, look, if the Raiders want any shot in this division in the next like 10, 12 years, they got to at some point slow Mahomes down. I mean, they have to do something. His numbers in the 8 games he's played, first of all, he's 7-1 against them. Okay. Yeah. Here are the yardage totals and the touchdowns in these games. And I'll just say he's thrown 3 picks over the course of the 8 games. 295 yards, 4 touchdowns. 281 yards, 2 touchdowns. 443 yards, 4 touchdowns. Then he had a game of only 175 yards and a touchdown. The Chiefs scored 40 points. 340 yards, 2 touchdowns. 348 yards, 2 touchdowns. 406 yards, 5 touchdowns. 258 yards, 2 touchdowns. And oh, by the way, in case you're looking for a prop to play this week, Travis Kelce in those 8 games is averaging 8 catches for 101 yards, and he's had 5 100-yard games against the Raiders. So, I mean, their 2 best offensive players have just annihilated the Raiders week in and week out. And Lucas brings up a point in the chat. Patrick Graham's their new defensive coordinator. Okay, he's taking over for Gus Bradley, who the Chiefs always torched and this year couldn't do anything against.
Yeah.
Graham was the coordinator for the Giants last year. The Chiefs played the Giants, and they won on a Monday night, ironically, at Arrowhead in October. But they only scored 20 points. Mahomes was not good in the game. He had a 24.5 QBR. He did throw for 275, but it was on like almost 50 passes. I would say there's a little like it's interesting and it's worth noting. At the same point, that was when the Chiefs were at their height of like they could not figure out what the hell they were doing offensively.
Right.
I don't know how much I care about that. Like the Raiders defensively are basically Max Crosby and 10 hood ornaments. So it's going to be like Graham is going to have to basically be Bill Belichick on steroids in this game if the Raiders are going to win defensively with their scheme.
Correct. And what I find interesting about this game, and I can't think of the amount of times that we had talked about it, whether it be on Stacking the Box or other appearances that the two of us were doing together, is how many times did we talk about Derek Carr having to likely throw for, 2.5, 3 touchdowns per game, and the Raiders having to score 30 points to be able to win those games, right? The conversation all offseason about how terrible this defense was. And the first 4 weeks of the season, I know that they got some pressure on Denver, but this Denver team isn't the Denver team that many thought that they would be either. So I'm not necessarily taking that win last week as any sort of spot moving forward where I say, you know what, about these Raiders, I think they figured something out. They're a bad defensive team. And based on Mahomes' numbers against the Raiders over the last several years. So, I mean, yes, it's different coaching staff, but the personnel isn't that much different. And also in prime time, like I'll give you a second. I know you got some great Chiefs stats on Pat Mahomes in prime time, but just for a little bit more context here. So Mahomes, coming off of a 2-game road trip, is 9-0 straight up at home. Coming off of 2+ games on the road. Against the AFC West, he's 22-3 straight up, 14-10-1 against the spread. But in prime time against the AFC West, he's 9-1 straight up, 6-4 against the spread. That no courtesy of Evan Abrams over at the Action Network. Like there's no indication here that makes me feel like even if Vegas puts up points, that Mahomes isn't going to be able to put up points against them. And it's just, if it's a 7-point spread, like he can cover that in a heartbeat. So I'm just looking over here because that's how it's been the last several years. And that's how both of these teams are going to have to play.
So to your point about Mahomes in prime time, I tweeted this out, I believe it's on Tuesday.
Great stat.
So in Patrick Mahomes' last 17 primetime games, I just took a full season as a sample. He's 15-2 straight up. In that season's worth of games, here are his stats. 4,800 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 9 picks. That includes 2 400-yard and 6 300-yard games. So in prime time, against typically very good teams, he's basically the MVP of the league over the last 17 games. And the Chiefs almost never lose. The only 2 games they've lost in that stretch, they lost to Baltimore in that game where Edwards-Helaire fumbled, and then they lost in that rainy Sunday night game to Buffalo last year. Also, should be noted, look, if you want a way for the Raiders to win this game, here's the only way, in my opinion, other than the Chiefs just self-destructing. The one game that Mahomes has lost to the Raiders, Carr connected on passes of 23, 42, 46, 59, and 72 yards. And they still won by 1 touchdown. Like, that is it. Like, it's going to take Carr having just explosive play after explosive play for them to win this game. Like I've seen people say, and not many, but I've seen a few this week with this idea of like, well, Josh Jacobs ran well against the Broncos last week. First of all, and everybody should sit down for this because I even can't believe this. The Chiefs have the number 1 rushing defense in the NFL. Okay? And they haven't played a bunch of bums either. Like they played real running backs for 4 weeks and they're number 1 in the NFL. The second thing is, if you're the Raiders, you're not winning this game with a ball control offense. You're just not. Like, you're going to have to go out and score and score and score. And so if you're going to do that, you're probably, especially with that offensive line, which has not been good, you're going to need to hit big plays and score quickly. Like that, I don't see this being a game where the Raiders are going to go out there and have a bunch of 12 and 14 play drives. So that means Adams down the field. It means Waller down the seam, although Waller did not practice, or he was in a non-contact jersey yesterday, as was Hunter Renfrow coming back from a concussion. So that's where I stand. But I thought all those stats seem notable to this point.
Yeah, they add up. You mentioned the point about these long sustained drives. What's interesting is that if you're Josh McDaniels, you do know that that's been a formula for success. against Kansas City back in your time with New England. The problem is that you had Tom damn Brady.
Right, and you had a really good defense.
Right,
Yes.
and you had a
You were
far
built
better
to play that way.
Correct.
Yeah.
So McDaniels hasn't been the most exciting head coach during his time in Denver and now with Las Vegas.
He's
but
6-20 in his last 26 games.
Yeah, it's not good.
He
So
stinks.
it'll be fascinating to see if they're going to try that same approach that we're talking about here. But it just doesn't make sense because next thing you know, they could blink and be down 14-0 midway through the first quarter. Like Mahomes has also had some of those games where I remember I think it might have been Gruden's first or second year where the Chiefs did nothing in the first and third and fourth quarter. And then I think he scored 4 touchdowns in the second. And they
300 yards in a quarter.
Yes. Was that also the Tyreek Hill game where he had like 200 yards? I'm trying to remember.
That was first of all, that was week 2 of the Chiefs Super Bowl season. And that was Demarcus Robinson day.
That's right.
Demarcus Robinson went berserk and had like 180 yards receiving and like 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, in that game, they had a 75 or an 80-yard touchdown to Hardman called back on a phantom. It was either like a holding or something, some weird but they have killed them over the years. Now, that doesn't mean, maybe the Raiders come up with different plans, a different coaching staff. But as you pointed out, Ben, you're right. Their personnel is pretty much the same. I mean, the Raiders are not wildly different than they were a year ago. This team, you can say, well, they brought in Chandler Jones. Chandler Jones has 8 tackles and 0 sacks in 5 weeks. Okay, Chandler Jones has been as productive as me for the Raiders this season. Crosby, by the way, who I actually think is severely underrated. I think he's one of the best players in the league. Nobody talks about it. He's an amazing player. He's only had he was a rookie in 2019, so he's only played 6 times against the Chiefs. Only has 1 sack. The Chiefs have actually really held him in check throughout his career against Kansas City. So, to me, by the way, that is going to be the only shot for the Raiders defensively in this game. They have got, with Crosby and Jones, they've got to get to Mahomes and probably force a turnover or 2. If they can't do that, and he's got time against that secondary, it's going to be a murder scene. I don't see any way in hell the Raiders are covering the Chiefs in this game. He's going to have to get under pressure for me to have any real fear of the Raiders defense in this game.
A few other trends worth bringing up for those that are tuning in and joining us. And by the way, you can find a lot of these over at BetSided. You can find some of them at Arrowhead Addict as well. I definitely would recommend staying over the course of the week. I know that our guy Joe Summers is going to have some of his favorite props and parlays for this game a little bit later on. You can find it right over at arrowheadaddict.com as the week goes on, once a lot of these props and projections are coming up. So the Raiders 1-3 against the spread this year. The lone win came in their win against Denver, but they nearly found a way to blow that game as well. They're 2-1-1 in overs in 2022. Conversely, the Chiefs 2-2 against the spread. Both of those coming in the blowout wins in Arizona and then at Tampa Bay. 2-2-0 in overs. Mentioned those numbers about Mahomes, how he's 9-0 straight up at home after a road trip. 22-3 straight up against the AFC West. As far as these two teams going up against each other, the over has gone 4-0 in their last 4 games. The home team is 8-3 against the spread in their last 11. Favorites are 5-2 against the spread over their last 7 games. And then as far as Mahomes versus Derek Carr, boy, it's a complete and total difference here. Mahomes is 5-1 against the Raiders, 4-2 against the spread. Verderame mentioned 22 touchdowns, 3 interceptions against Oakland and Las Vegas, if you want to combine both of those together. Derek Carr against the Chiefs is 1-7 straight up, only 2-6 against the spread. And the crazy thing is that in a lot of those games too, Verderame, he's put up numbers. I wouldn't say he's necessarily played well, but we mentioned that 4-0 to the over the last 4 games. They've thrown for multiple touchdowns and they've gone a bunch of distances through the air. So I think if you're looking at props for Derek Carr, they're more than likely to hit on the over side because he's just going to have to throw. And I don't even know if they can set a number low enough because that's how they're going to have to play this game.
Here against Spagnuolo to 2019 on, Carr's numbers against Spagnuolo have been $198, a touchdown, and 2 picks. Second game against Spagnuolo, 222 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks. Then in 2020, the game they won, that game we had a ton of big throws down the field, 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, get a great game. Next week, 275, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Solid game. They scored 31 points. They just lost in the last minute. Now, last year was an interesting story. So last year, he threw for 261 yards and 2 touchdowns and a pick on 35 attempts. And then in the next game, 263 yards, we did on 45 attempts and really did not do a ton. 1 touchdown, 1 pick, only scored 9 points in the game. So they've been able to somewhat curtail Carr. I mean, he has only had 1 300-yard game against them. But here's the bigger number to me. So last year in the 2 games, they sacked him 6 times. Okay. The time before that, in the game that the Raiders won, they only sacked him once, and they didn't sack him at all the year. So they only sacked him once in 2020. Last year, they sacked him 6 times. That's going to be the key, and they sacked him 5 times in 2019. So do the Chiefs in this game, even with the weapons that the Raiders have, which are significant, do the Raiders just blitz them? I mean, do the Chiefs just blitz the Raiders? That's my question. Like, do the Chiefs in this game just say, you know what? Your line's not good. Have no fear of Carr beating us over the top. Going to go after him. Or do they say, we can win with 4 guys up front, and we're just going to drop 7 and everything's going to stay in front of us? Last year, they blitzed the daylights out of Carr. They didn't have Devontae Adams. So we'll see. We don't know yet if they're going to have Renfrow or Waller. Waller, like I said, was in a non-contact jersey yesterday, and Renfrow's missed the last 2 weeks with a concussion. So we shall see. And by the way, Matt Collins has had a good year for the Raiders. He's somebody to watch in this game.
Yeah,
but it'll be interesting.
Matt Collins is an interesting name. We'll see where they list some of his props. Obviously, you know that Adams is going to have a ton of yards likely attached to his name. I think he's scored a touchdown in either every game or every game but one this year. Waller's had a bit of a down year, but I don't necessarily put it all on him. He's dealt with some health issues. And remember, when you add Devontae Adams to your roster, you're no longer likely to lead your team in targets. So it's not necessarily fair on Waller to project that some of his numbers were going to go down. A lot of them have. I want to bring up the line isn't out yet, Verderame, but Mahomes is always, he'll never say it directly, but when there's a storyline involved that could involve him or somebody kind of throwing shade his way, he never discusses it directly, but it's always responded to. Give you a case in point. The game against Chicago a handful of years ago, where he all of a sudden did the counting for the amount of picks that Mitch Trubisky was taken ahead of him, which was 8. Trubisky went number 2, Mahomes went number 10. Even last week, mentioned in the post-game interview on NBC to Melissa Stark that the Buccaneers were jabbing a little bit how they were going to create pressure. Talked about how well the offensive line did. This week, there's another intriguing storyline, and that is the Monday Night Football broadcast is led by 2 Hall of Famers in Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. Pat Mahomes is 4 touchdowns away from passing Troy Aikman. It's stunning. He's 4 touchdowns away from passing Troy Aikman on the all-time list. At this age, at this point in his career. Again, very different styles of football. And a while back, it was Aikman who basically said, like, call me when he has like a third of my rings. So he's got the 1. Obviously, there's a few more hopefully on the way. But I'm thinking about alternative lines for props here. Mahomes' touchdowns for this game is likely going to be set at over under 2.5. And most times when you get it at 2.5, Verderame, that's a pretty high number, and you can almost get it at positive odds. Maybe because it's the Raiders and Mahomes. Maybe it's close to even money, but I'd be surprised. I'm telling you, man, like, I'm going to bet the over on that alternative line at over 3.5 touchdowns and get that plus value, because if I know one thing about Mahomes is that dude takes notes. And it's as good of a matchup as you can find. And maybe I'm going right with the public alongside here, but I just think the matchup sets up really well. They're going to throw the ball. He's going to have easy completions. The Raiders can't stop anybody. History says that he's going to put up a bunch of points and throw for a bunch of yards and a bunch of touchdowns. Why not get the plus value that's likely going to be on the board and take the over on 3.5 touchdowns from Mahomes this week?
It's a good call. It's a good call. You know what? This game, sometimes you don't have to overcomplicate things. Like, this game just screams in a lot of ways like this could be a very, very tough night for the Raiders. This game, when you look at it from a lot of different standpoints, it's at Arrowhead. It's in prime time. I just ran down Mahomes' stats in prime time. The guy since his rookie year, they just don't lose a game. I mean, they're almost impossible to beat when they're under the lights. Then you get into the matchups in the game. There's nobody guarding Kelce on that team. Nobody. I mean, they're going to have to do all kinds of stuff to keep him down. And even that with Kelce, like the Chiefs will find ways to isolate him, get him one-on-one. They'll match him up. Juju Smith-Schuster, who's guarding him in this game? Who's doing it? But they don't have the corner play. Nate Hobbs is probably their best corner. And like, I respect Nate Hobbs. Like, come on now. I mean, they don't have even MVS. Like, I could see him having a big game in this game. Like, there's nobody. Their run defense, and Denzel Perriman has a concussion. He may not play in this game. Like, he's the one guy in their front seven along with Crosby. You're like, okay. I mean, the Chiefs should be able to just run the ball at him. And you're coming off a game where the Chiefs were able to just run the ball down Tampa's throat. And they scored 41 points. And by the way, for everyone listening here, you're going to get a little bit of an insight. So at 4 o'clock, Patrick Allen and I will be doing our show. We've been teasing an interview all week for you. It'll be none other than Travis Kelce, the tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yes.
So we'll play that during the show. I talked to him yesterday. We recorded it. And he had a lot to say, a lot of really, really insightful stuff, including, by the way, why he picked to wear number 87.
His podcast, by the way, with his brother is great. I don't know if you had a chance.
Fantastic. I mentioned it on the interview with him.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you're watching this show, you just got a little bit of breaking news. But he is going to be joining us, or he did join us. It'll be aired. But one thing I did talk to him about was just them kind of coming together as an offense, and I'll let him speak on it. But he was very like, yeah, look, we have kind of found ourselves and figured some things out. And I just think if you're the Raiders, like, it's a tough week in a lot of ways, but the biggest problem is they figured a lot of this stuff out last week against a much better team. And then you combine that with that Colts game is still somewhat fresh in their minds. Like, I can't imagine them just like going, yeah, we've got this in the bag. So I just think if you're the Raiders, this is about as tough of a spot as you could possibly play them in.
So I think what's also important for us, because we talked about this a little bit in week 3, and I mentioned that when the number got to 7, I decided to take the Colts, and I still think that was a lucky bet for me. Like, Colts had no business winning that game, but the NFL has weird bounces, and Mahomes did not play well, and the offense didn't play well, and the defense wasn't advantageous. Like, it's the NFL. Sometimes the number works the wrong way, and even though the game script goes according to plan, things break weird. Let's go over a couple maybe blind spots where it's worth pointing out something on the other side that could back the Raiders that maybe we need to say, okay, it seems fairly obvious here, especially that if you can still find this number at 7. And I should mention this too, that check your different sports books, especially where you are. Shop for lines. BetMGM and FanDuel, who we have affiliates with here at Arrowhead Addict and at BetSided, have completely different lines for this game. The FanDuel has the Chiefs at -7.5 and at 51.5 for the over. Right now, BetMGM has the Chiefs at 7 and the total at 51. If you want to bet the Chiefs and you want to bet the over, having those two numbers is monumental in getting an edge. You'd much rather have 7 than 7.5. That is a key number on both the spread and on the over. That's something just you have to look around, especially if you're trying to find the right number. And if you haven't signed up for some of these books yet, there's still a ton of really good deals where you'll get a lot of different bets match. You get some free bets as well. Have to look for the best number here. Now, if you want to go the other way and take the Raiders plus 7.5 Monday night primetime game, or you think it's going to be an under based on the weather report, then maybe FanDuel this week has the more advantageous odds for you. But a couple stats and a couple trends, Verderame, I think it's worth mentioning just to see whether or not we think they matter when it comes to this game. In moments for Derek Carr coming off of games against the division, right?
Yep.
Like historically, he's been pretty good in the second leg of back-to-back divisional games. And I think it's because for a long time, the Raiders haven't been a good team. And you've gotten a better number. So Derek Carr, 6-7 straight up in the second leg of back-to-back divisional games, but he's 10-3 against the spread. That's part one. Part two is when you have these high scores, and again, shout out to Evan Abrams of the Action Network for putting some of these notes together. when you have these big spreads, large totals on Monday Night Football in particular, teams outscoring their opponents by 7 points or more at this point in the season are only 19, 32, and 3 against the spread on Monday Night Football, which tends to make you say, okay, it's still early. Even though the projections have this team blowing them out, history has shown you that because of the primetime nature, they get up for these games and it tends to be closer than most people anticipate. So with those two trends in mind, and again, trends are not an end-all be-all for making a betting decision, but they do help in trying to take everything together to say whether or not you're missing anything. I think those two are relevant, but ultimately, I just can't get behind either of them that would make me want to lean either towards the Raiders or towards the under.
Because neither one of them have anything to do with this actual matchup. Like that's the thing,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's interesting, but it's not like this has happened with the Chiefs and the Raiders. Every trend that happens with the Chiefs and the Raiders is the Chiefs are going to kill them. I mean let's just be honest.
Or more, even more so than that, they're going to put up points because the Raiders have put up points.
Yeah,
I think 3 of the last 5 games over 30 points.
Look, I mean, I would put it this way. I think the Chiefs are going to win this game by like 10 to 12 points. I think that's what this is going to be. I don't think it's going to be one of these games that it's been sometimes in the past where Chiefs beat them literally by like 35 points. I don't know that I could see that. I can make the case for that. But I think it's going to be something like 35-23, 34-24. And that might even include a garbage time touchdown or something with the Raiders. Like I think the game, the thing that just analyzing the game, I just can't get past is I just don't think the Raiders can stop them. Right. I don't. And by the way, the rain has been moved to Tuesday now, so we'll see how that plays out. So we'll see if it stays. It's weather. Could come in, could come out. It's worth noting. But no, you know what? I think it's a game where the other part of this is like who's playing for the Raiders. Right. If Harriman's not playing, that's a big loss because he's about one of the 2 or 3 guys on defense that actually can play. Renfro, is he playing? I don't know. Waller, is he playing? And Waller at this point in the year has had some struggles catching the football. We'll see. I think, though, if you want to make the case for the Raiders real quick, it is this. They can throw the ball to these targets. They have real weapons. They have the best receiver in this game is on the Raiders. Okay? The 2 best receivers, wide receivers, are on the Raiders. Now, factor in Kelsey and all that, fair enough. But 3 of the best 4 weapons are on the Raiders. Now, the problem is the quarterback is on the Chiefs. The offensive line's on the Chiefs. The coach is on the Chiefs. The defense is on the Chiefs. All these other things are with the Chiefs. But the case is Carr and those weapons have a big day, and that either keeps them in the game enough to cover or somehow pull off the upset. To me, that's the only case in this game other than just what we saw in Indianapolis. The Chiefs just beat themselves for 60 minutes.
Right. And I think to your point, like they have that still fresh in their memory where it's not going to be as much of an issue. It doesn't feel as much of a trap. It's a divisional game. Right. It's a primetime game. If this were a noon kickoff.
Yep.
Then maybe I'm thinking, okay, maybe the Raiders hang on for a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. Next week, Chiefs need the second half to kind of wake themselves up. But it just hasn't been the case with Mahomes in primetime. I'm with you. I think, again, having the Chiefs at -7 is the way you want to go. That's a lean for me. I haven't bet it. I did bet the over at 50.5. As I mentioned before, it's available at 51 at one book, 51.5 at another. And it was interesting to me to see this line really take off at the beginning of the week and immediately get back down. And I can't help but wonder if there's a wide variety of reasons for why that could have been. I think it's because a lot of the sharps wanted to middle this game. 51 is a big number. So if you get it at over 50.5 and under 53, then you have a chance for both of your bets to win. So that's what I think happened. I can't guarantee that, but there's just enough trends that say, like a lot of these times on Monday Night Football, we're not going to see these massive totals that we would expect. And the Chiefs defense is also very good, which I think we need to consider as well. But I do like the over 50.5 just because I got it right before that key number of 51.
No, I think you're right on. I like the over as well. I would take the Chiefs to cover, but I'm more confident in the over. I think if my 2 most confident things is the over and the Chiefs money line.
Yeah.
No matter
no
what.
doubt. And again, this is also a game, well, if you can still get it at 7, that you might want to consider teasing the Chiefs too. Get it
Oh,
past
yeah.
that number of
Yeah.
7-3. Just all they have to do is basically win by one and
Right.
a half,
Right.
depending on where you get it. Tease it with another big favorite this week. You're gonna do like Green Bay against
Tease
maybe
with the
Daniel
over.
Jones. There's plenty of games that you can choose from this week.
Yep.
Take Buffalo. Buffalo's actually probably not one I would do. But there's plenty of them. We'll write about it over at BetSide. You can find it over there.
All right. I know you got to run. Listen, this has been Best Bets with BetSided. Ben Heisler, Matt Verderame here, breaking down the Chiefs and the Raiders in Week 5 on Monday Night Football at Arrowhead Stadium. I will be back later with Pat Fallon at 4 o'clock, and we'll be airing our interview with Travis Kelce this afternoon. So check that out. We'll see you all in a few hours. Thanks for watching.